I mocked my boyfriend for selling shoes in a street market and told him he did not deserve a woman of my level after he lost everything in a car accident, and I walked away chasing a richer man. My name is Sally, I'm 29, and today I want to tell something that, although it embarrasses me, I feel I need to get off my chest. It's the story of how I ended up losing someone who truly loved me just because I got carried away by the appearance of success. I met Wilfredy when I was 23 and he was 25. We both worked at a flower shop. It was a small, family-owned place with a simple but pleasant atmosphere. I was in charge of the counter, answering calls, and taking orders. He was the one who made the floral arrangements, assembled the bouquets, and prepared the large orders. From the first day, his way of being caught my attention. He was always in a good mood, made jokes with the coworkers, and it was clear he enjoyed his work. He had an easy smile and an energy that was contagious to everyone. I remember him arriving every morning with a large bottle of water, his headphones hanging from his neck, and greeting everyone with a sincere good morning. He didn't have great luxuries or an air of pretension. He was simply someone who worked hard, and at first I really liked that about him. Little by little we started talking more. At first they were short conversations during work, then lunches together, and overtime outings after work. Wilfredy was attentive, respectful, and always tried to surprise me with small details. A flower wrapped in recycled paper, a coffee when he knew I was tired, or simply walking me to the bus after my shift. When he asked me to be his girlfriend, I didn't hesitate. At that moment, I felt I was missing nothing. We were both young, working, and dreaming of having something of our own someday. What I admired most about him was his determination. Although the salary at the flower shop wasn't high, he didn't settle. After work, he drove as an app driver to earn extra money. He had a Nissan Sentra, a bit old but well-maintained, that he had bought with effort and that allowed him to generate a decent income. Sometimes I'd see him arrive tired, with his eyes red from lack of sleep, but always with a smile. He'd say it was all worth it if it helped him move forward a little more. He'd tell me about his plans, saving up to open his own shop, having a small floral arrangement workshop, or even dedicating himself to event transportation. I listened to him with affection, although deep down I sometimes worried he was pushing himself too hard, but his determination made me feel I was with a responsible man. A few months passed and our relationship became more stable. I had already met his mother and his sister, and he had also been to my house. Everything seemed to be going well until one day something changed my course without me noticing it at the time. One of my uncles, who worked at a medium-sized import company, told me that one of his colleagues was looking for a secretary. He told me the position was simple: answering calls, organizing documents, coordinating schedules, and attending meetings. The salary wasn't huge, but it was better than the one at the flower shop, and it was also a more comfortable office job, with air conditioning and fixed hours. The idea excited me, not because I didn't like the flower shop, but because I felt it was time to grow, to try something new. I told Wilfredy about it, and he supported me immediately. He told me I should try it, that if I did well, he'd be happy for me. I had a short interview and got hired. I remember my first day as if it were yesterday. The building was modern, with shiny floors and glass walls. Everyone was well-dressed, some in suits, others in elegant clothes. I arrived in my best blouse and formal pants that I had bought especially for the occasion. My boss, Mr. German, was a man in his 40s, serious but kind. He always wore suits with expensive watches and different cars every week. From the first moment, his confidence impressed me. The first few months were about adapting. I learned quickly, earned his trust, and began to handle more delicate tasks. I answered emails, prepared important documents, and sometimes accompanied him to meetings to take notes. The work environment was very different from what I knew. Here, conversations revolved around business, investments, and travel. Many of my colleagues talked about their cars, their watches, or the places they visited on weekends. I listened in silence, trying not to feel out of place. At first, I was a bit embarrassed to say that my boyfriend worked at a flower shop and also drove for an app, not because I was ashamed of him, but because the contrast with my new environment was very large. Over time, I started to compare him, even though I didn't want to admit it. My boss, for example, always arrived impeccable, in designer suits, expensive perfume, and an air of authority. The other employees spoke of him with respect. Meanwhile, Wilfredy continued with his old car, working long hours, arriving tired, and sometimes with no time to go out. Once, during a breakfast at the office, a colleague asked me if my partner also worked in the business field. I didn't know what to answer. I just said he had a small independent business because I felt that saying he worked at a flower shop and drove for an app would make me look less, I don't know, on their level. That's when something started to change inside me. My boss began to have more confidence in me. He treated me kindly, sometimes with a certain flirtatiousness that I didn't know how to interpret. One day, for example, he gave me a box of chocolates because I saw you were stressed, he said, smiling. Another day, as we were leaving work, he insisted on taking me home because it was raining. I accepted gratefully, although inside I felt a bit uncomfortable. The gesture that really marked a before and after was the gift of the iPhone. It was Secretary's Day and the company organized a small event. Among the raffle prizes were perfumes, vouchers, and some details, but at the end my boss approached me with an elegant bag and said, "This is a personal gift for your good performance." Inside was the latest model of the iPhone. I didn't know what to say. All my colleagues were surprised and I blushed. I didn't want anyone to misinterpret the gesture, so I tried to downplay it. That night, when I got home, Wilfredy asked me where that phone had come from. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also didn't want to explain that my boss had given it to me. So I improvised a story. I told him I had won it in a raffle they held during the Secretary's Day celebration. He hugged me, congratulated me, and even told me I deserved it for my effort. He didn't notice anything strange, and that relieved me, but also made me feel guilty. Still, I couldn't help feeling a mix of pride and confusion. For the first time in my life, I had a better salary. I worked in a professional environment and used a phone I could never have bought with my old salary. Over the months, my boss offered me a promotion. He said he saw potential in me, that I was responsible and organized. The raise wasn't huge, but it was enough for my income to surpass Wilfredy's. I felt powerful, independent, important. He, on the other hand, continued to work long hours, now more tired than before. Sometimes I noticed he was frustrated because the car's expenses and maintenance were high. Still, he tried to stay optimistic, but I no longer saw him with the same eyes. When I saw him arrive in his driver's uniform, with his hands stained with grease from checking the engine, something inside me began to change. I didn't say it out loud, but I started to think that maybe I had outgrown that stage, that perhaps I deserved a more elegant life. I remember one night in particular. We had gone out to dinner at a small restaurant, one of our usual spots. While we ate, he enthusiastically told me he was saving up to change his car for a newer one with the goal of getting into a higher category on the app. I nodded, but inside I thought that effort barely brought him a little closer to where I already was. When we got home, I felt confused. I didn't understand why he no longer fulfilled me as before, why I looked at him and saw someone who seemed to be falling behind. Sometimes I looked at myself in the mirror and liked seeing the new version of myself with more formal clothes, the new phone, and a work environment where people talked about big goals. But in that reflection, I also saw a growing distance with the man who once made me feel loved unconditionally. And that distance, although I didn't know it yet, would soon become an abyss. Everything started to fall apart the day Wilfredy had an accident. It was a Friday night. I was at home resting after a long week of work when I received a call from his mother. She told me with a trembling voice that Will had been in a crash while on a trip with a passenger. I rushed to the hospital with my heart racing. When I arrived, he was on a gurney with his left arm immobilized and several bruises on his face. Fortunately, it wasn't serious, but the scare was huge. The car, however, was completely destroyed. The insurance company refused to cover the damages, arguing that the vehicle didn't meet certain contract requirements, and that was a huge blow to him. That car was not only his work tool, it was also his economic independence. In the following days, I tried to support him, but my attitude wasn't the best. I was worried, yes, but I was also frustrated by the idea that now he'd have to start from scratch. I accompanied him a few times to medical checkups, but soon I went back to focusing on my work. Wilfredy was in a cast for 2 months, and during that time he couldn't work. The flower shop fired him, according to him, unfairly, because he had missed several days after the accident. They gave him a small severance pay, but nothing more. I remember one night while we were having dinner at his house, he told me sadly, "Sally, I feel like everything has fallen apart, but I promise I'm going to get through this." I smiled at him, although inside I didn't know if I believed him. He was no longer the same enthusiastic guy as before. He was quieter, more serious, and although he tried to stay positive, the weight of failure was visible on him. During those months, things between us cooled down. I had less and less time to see him, and when I did, the conversations revolved around his situation or my progress at work. Sometimes he'd talk about ideas to generate income, like selling products online or partnering with a friend in a small business. I listened to him but didn't take him seriously. In my mind, those were plans with no future, dreams that didn't fit with the kind of life I was beginning to imagine for myself. One day, while having lunch with my office colleagues, one of them joked about boyfriends who still use public transportation. Everyone laughed and I, instead of defending him, just smiled. I didn't say that my boyfriend didn't even have a car anymore. The shame I felt that day was something new for me, and it was also the beginning of my emotional distance. When Wilfredy recovered physically, he tried to look for a job again, but things weren't easy. The flower shop didn't want to rehire him. For weeks I saw him get frustrated, send out resumes, make calls, and always receive the same answer: "We'll call you later." Until one day, with a tired smile, he told me he had found something. "I'm going to sell sneakers," he explained with excitement. "They're good quality replicas. A friend has a stall at the flea market, and he said I could partner with him." I stayed silent. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to support him, but another part felt a kind of rejection. "At a flea market?" I asked, unable to hide my tone. "Yes, but don't worry, it's not permanent. It's just while I save money to set up something more formal," he replied. I tried to smile, but inside I felt something break. I couldn't help but imagine my coworkers talking about their professional partners with stable careers and new cars, while mine sold fake sneakers at a market. The following days became heavy. Every time he wrote to me to tell me how he was doing, I responded coldly. When he invited me to see him, I made excuses. I told myself I was just busy, but deep down I knew I was avoiding him. One Saturday, I finally agreed to visit him. He was at his stall, under a tarp, surrounded by boxes of sneakers from different brands. When he saw me arrive, his face lit up. "You don't know how happy I am that you came," he said enthusiastically. I faked a smile. He showed me some models, explained how they got the pairs, how they negotiated prices, and how he planned to save for his own space. But as I listened to him, I couldn't stop thinking that this wasn't the future I wanted. That night we argued. I told him he should look for a real job, something stable, something that wouldn't make him look like a street vendor. He tried to explain that this was also work, that he was trying to get ahead, that it was just the beginning of a project, but my words were harsh. "You know what, Wilfredy," I said with contained anger, "you don't deserve a woman of my level. Find yourself a saleswoman there at your flea market." We broke up. He looked at me in silence, surprised, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He tried to say something, but I was already leaving. I remember that as I walked towards the transport, my heart was beating fast. I didn't know if it was from anger, sadness, or shame. Part of me felt I had done the right thing, that I couldn't continue with someone who didn't share my ambitions. But another part, deep down, knew that something inside me had been extinguished. The following days were strange. He didn't write to me, and I didn't look for him either. At the office, everyone continued with their routine, and I pretended I was fine. But every time I saw someone arrive in a new car, with an expensive watch, or talking about their professional partner, I felt a pang of pride and at the same time an emptiness difficult to describe, because even though I didn't admit it, I knew I had left behind someone who truly loved me, and I had done it for a mistaken idea of what it meant to have level. After breaking up with Wilfredy, for the first few months I felt a kind of liberation. I kept telling myself I had done the right thing, that a woman like me deserved more, that my life should move forward and not be stuck with someone who could barely support himself. Sometimes I felt guilty remembering him, but I immediately convinced myself it had been a mature decision. I'd look at myself in the mirror, get ready for work, and tell myself I'd soon find someone who matched my new aspirations. In that process of self-deception, my boss became my target. He had been subtly flirting with me for a while, with compliments or details I knew weren't just work courtesy. He was a successful, confident man with money and presence. He had everything I thought represented the real level I wanted for my life. At first, I hesitated, but after so many months of feeling lonely and empty, I began to let myself be carried away by the idea of conquering someone like him. I started dressing more provocatively, paying attention to every detail. Blouses with a little more cleavage, more intense perfume, more direct glances. It wasn't immediate, but little by little I noticed he perceived it. One day, when most of the staff had already left, he asked me to stay a little longer to help him review some documents. I wasn't surprised. Deep down I knew something like this could happen. The atmosphere in his office was different when we were alone. The lights were softer. You could hear the distant sound of night traffic, and the air felt dense, heavy. As we reviewed the papers, he came up from behind to point at something on the screen. His hand brushed my shoulder. I didn't move away. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. We just looked at each other, and then he kissed me. It was a quick, unexpected but intense kiss. I didn't resist. His perfume enveloped me, and without much thought, I kissed him back. His hands began to roam my body, and for a moment I let myself go. But just before anything else happened, I stopped him. "I want to at least go to dinner first," I told him with a nervous smile. He laughed, took my hand and said, "All right, I owe you that." That night we went to a very expensive restaurant, the kind of place I had only seen on social media or in magazines. The final bill was practically my entire month's salary, but he paid without flinching. As we toasted with wine and talked about business, I felt part of that world I had so desired. I told myself that's where I belonged, that I was finally next to someone of my level. After dinner, he suggested we go to a hotel. I didn't hesitate. It was the culmination of everything I had imagined, the conquest of a powerful man, access to a different life, the feeling of having climbed the ladder. That night we spent together, and although at that moment I felt important, when I woke up the next day something in his attitude had changed. In the following days he became distant. He no longer looked at me the same way. He avoided being alone with me and only talked about work. At first I thought he was busy, but when the evasions were repeated, I decided to ask him directly, "Is something wrong with me?" I said one afternoon while he was reviewing some reports. Without looking up much, he replied calmly, "Sally, that was just a night of fun. I thought you knew that." I was silent, unable to process what I had just heard. "Nothing more?" I asked with a trembling voice. "You're my employee and I appreciate you, but we are not and will not be anything more," he said coldly. "I'm a married man and I'm not going to leave my wife for my secretary." His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I felt shame, anger, and sadness at the same time. That night I cried inconsolably. I realized I had destroyed a sincere relationship to chase an empty illusion. I had confused admiration with love and ambition with personal worth. Months passed. My boss continued to behave cordially but distantly. After a while, he announced he was moving to another city to manage a new branch. Shortly after his departure, the company began to downsize and I was laid off. Without savings and without direction, I had no choice but to go back to my parents' house. It was humiliating. I had gone from working in air-conditioned offices and expensive restaurants to returning to my childhood room, surrounded by memories of a life I thought I had overcome. I was unemployed for a few months until by chance I found out that the flower shop where I had worked before was hiring. I went without much expectation, but to my surprise they rehired me. The place was still the same, the smell of fresh flowers, the light green painted walls, and the bouquets lined up on the shelves. Everything was as before except me. Sometimes, while preparing orders, I'd think about how everything had changed in so few years. I was 29 and felt more empty than ever. I had lost the man who loved me unconditionally. I had confused stability with success and ended up right where I started. One ordinary day, while we were at the flower shop, I heard two colleagues talking and laughing. "Hey, this is Will," one said, showing her phone. "Yeah, you didn't know, right?" "Who would have thought?" "Right?" replied the other. The name caught my attention. I discreetly approached and asked, "What are you talking about?" "Will who?" "Wilfredi," one of them said. "Look, he's on TikTok." I took the phone and saw the video. There he was, Wilfredi, the man I had despised, speaking with a confidence I had never seen in him before. In the video he said, "Friends, remember we are authorized Nike distributors. We have the latest models in sneakers and sportswear." I was paralyzed. The background showed a large warehouse with shelves full of original boxes, with authentic tags and logos. It wasn't the flea market stall I remembered. It was a real company with staff, inventory, and a professional image. Out of curiosity, I opened his profile. He had thousands of followers, hundreds of positive comments, videos showing trips, meetings, and deliveries to sports stores. In one of the clips, he appeared in New York inside a huge Nike store, reviewing the most exclusive and expensive sneakers on the market. He spoke with authority, with confidence, like an established businessman. He had even published some motivational videos giving advice on entrepreneurship. One in particular stopped me. He was responding to a comment where someone asked him about the difficulties of starting from scratch. Will said, "Friends, it's normal for people not to trust. No one understands how valuable entrepreneurship is to us. We are people outside the norm. There will be friends and family who don't have faith in you." He paused, looked directly at the camera, and added, "In my case, I had an ex-girlfriend who at the slightest adversity left insulting me. And look now, she didn't believe in me. But that's okay, because she didn't deserve to be here." I felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned off the phone and stood in silence. My colleagues continued talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. That night, when I got home, I looked up his profile on my own. I watched all his videos, his achievements, his travels, his growth. He seemed like a completely different person from the one I had known. He wasn't the guy with the old car or the flea market vendor. He was a fulfilled man, with goals, success, and confidence. As I looked at the screen, tears began to fall, not out of envy but out of remorse. I realized that the failure hadn't been his but mine. I had confused a person's value with their economic position. I had despised him when he needed support the most, and instead of accompanying him, I chose to make fun of his effort, and karma somehow returned everything to me. He prospered, and I was still exactly where I was years ago, in the same flower shop, with the same salary, making the same bouquets. That night, I looked at myself in the mirror and could barely recognize myself. I was 29, but I felt much older. I realized I lost everything due to pride, that I traded sincere love for appearances, and that in the end the one who really didn't deserve someone of his level was me.